Welcome, Nicole. We're so glad to have you here. And as many of you in the audience are probably well aware, Nicole authored Accelerate, the Science of Lean Software and DevOps, and also co-founded DORA. But for those of you who may not be as familiar, can we start off by you just telling everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I actually started my career as a developer. I wrote software for a handful of years. I started in mainframes, but then I was working in large software systems. I did work with telecoms. I did work with finance systems. I was even in hospital systems for a few years. But then I was a developer, and the thing that really kind of kickstarted a bunch of this work was we had 3 or 4 years of 7-day forced marches. And I was like, there has to be a better way. And we started hearing rumors of new ways to write software that were actually better both for developers themselves and for the company.
Yeah. And so, with that background, what was actually the impetus for you to write Accelerate?
Great question. So I had been doing and kind of leading the State of DevOps reports for several years, and I realized that when people would come hit me with questions at conferences or in emails, I had this kind of mental model of, I think, 6 or 7 years of the research in my head, and I knew how it all fit together, but not everyone did, right? I knew the research in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and I knew how it all worked, but not everyone had that big mental model, and not everyone also knew the longer version of some of the constructs, some of the capabilities, some of the outcomes, and so we thought, well, if it's in one book, this is going to be so much easier to access and use.
Yeah. And so for those of you who may not have actually read the book, what were some of the results and your findings?
Yeah. So, even as I think about some of the findings that we had, and I don't even know if I want to say surprising now, but at the time were that a lot of these capabilities and practices lead to better organizational performance. And if we, maybe jump in the Wayback Machine a little bit, back in 2013, 2014, this was non-obvious, right? Back then, this flew in the face of 40 years of accounting research and finance research, that you could invest in technology and get a better return on investment, make an impact on a company. And why is this? It's because you couldn't just spend money on computers, get money out. And it was because we used to do it the wrong way, right? Because you can buy a laptop, I can buy a laptop, anyone here can buy a laptop. That doesn't get you money. And so we wanted to do this research and understand why, and it was because, what's that middle piece? And that middle piece is actually developing and delivering software better, improving that value piece, and that was, kind of one of those big surprises.
Yeah. And so there was this part in the book that really struck me, right? At the very beginning, you kind of rail against maturity models. And you mentioned this as you were talking, that you looked at different capabilities that organizations, if they could learn and unpack, would really be tied to their performance. And I think you have 5 categories broadly that encapsulate 24 different capabilities. Can you give the audience a bit of a taste as to what some of those are?
Sure, absolutely. So when we talk about these, capabilities we want to improve, the broad categories are, technology that we're talking about, things like continuous integration, continuous delivery, automated testing, good development practices like trunk-based development, or at least, really minimizing branching, architecture. And when we talk about architecture, it's the ability to make fine-grained changes without having to, or to be able to make changes without fine-grained communication and coordination with others. So good APIs, right? Good structuring. Culture, of course, is important. And when we talk about culture, it's about having trust and information flow and transparency. Another one is process, right? Having good, clear process and not, heavyweight change processes. And then when we know what those capabilities are, we can see improvements in, and we have statistically significant improvements in this, speed and stability. Now what people call DORA metrics, it's the speed and stability of our ability to ship software, which can be features, it can be security patches, it can be infrastructure improvements. And so, I don't love maturity models because it ends up being very prescriptive to everyone, but we know that we each have unique needs in our software. And if instead we look at what is our unique constraint and which capability is it that we need to improve in order to unlock the improvements in that speed and stability for us. That's really what's important.
Yeah, and we can't ever forget about configuration.
Of course.
So one of my favorite insights from the book was basically this connection between DevOps success and profitability. That innately seems right, and you talked about, you can't just buy computers and have money come out the end. But, how did you actually arrive at that conclusion through your research?
Yeah, and thanks for kind of giving me a chance to, disentangle that just a little bit more. It was that it seems like it makes sense, and there were a handful of companies that were doing this, but like I said, it flew in the face of decades of research, and people are like, well, this can't be the case. And it was this middle piece that we had to unlock. It was that you couldn't just improve the tech and then get money out. It was that what's the middle piece? And the middle piece is this value piece, right? It's our ability to develop and deliver software with speed and stability, right? And then the other interesting piece, and the surprise, I guess, is that speed and stability go together. And there was also this misunderstanding or this confusion that speed and stability even could go together. For years, many people thought that in order to be stable, you had to go slow. Turns out that's not the case. And now we have several years of data showing that that's not the case. In fact, if you slow down, you introduce instability. And so, you can't just, plug in money and get, plug in investments, get value out. You have to be doing something with it. And that something is, for software companies, creating value through software. Are we shipping, features to our customers? And are those features valuable? Are we able to turn around security patches? Are we able to upgrade our infrastructure quickly? And so that's where that missing piece was. And if we couldn't connect it to that software value delivery piece, it just didn't make sense. And I think that's where it was so key, because now we look at, the joke is we look at banks. Banks aren't valuable because they hide or hold gold bars in safes anymore. They're valuable because of the things that they can do with software for us.
Right. Yeah, and so, a theme has been really about, the concerns of leaders building happy, healthy teams. And through some of your research, you actually were able to uncover a number of connections between DevOps success and developer happiness. Would you share a few of those with us?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mentioned that getting into this was actually me seeing, being a part of these 7-day forced marches for years, but also observing the harm that it did to so many developers and so many teams, and saying, what, I wonder if there's a connection here. And it turns out there really is, because when we make investments to improve the way that we deliver software, it has this incredible effect both on our ability to deliver value for our companies, which is great for those of us who are in the positions of running our companies, because it makes it much more efficient, much more smooth, right? Because we get, I loved how you put it, where we want to put more wood behind fewer arrows, right? However, at the same time, when we remove that friction, when we make things easier, when we make things much more predictable and understandable, let me use slightly different words. When we remove friction, that's a technology investment. When we make things much more predictable and understandable, those are process improvements. Those are many times cultural improvements and communication improvements. We've improved the developer experience. We've improved the environment in which developers work. So we've gotten this twofer of we make money, we increase value for our customers, and we've fundamentally improved the work environment in which developers are doing their work.
So important.
Yeah, I really, really loved it. And the wonderful thing is that we continue to discover more and more in this area. I'm continuing to find more and more ways in which we can get this win-win situation. And it's so unique and so wonderful, because there aren't many places where this is actually the thing that happens.
Yeah, especially taking the system view, right?
Right, yeah.
So these next two questions are actually from Amy Dredge, who's an engineering practice leader here at Pluralsight. Have there ever been any metrics that you've encountered in your line of work, your research, that were very common, but you would actually recommend that we avoid in measurement?
Yeah. So I love this question too because I get it a bunch, right? So lines of code, don't love, right? But surprisingly, like I said, I still get it. Lines of code is tough because there's no straightforward answer here, right? More lines of code, probably not great. It's just easy to measure because more lines of code can just be technical debt, right? Sometimes the best thing you can do is delete lines of code. Another one that I really just don't love is utilization. Because if all we're doing is maxing out utilization in our system, as utilization reaches 100%, lead times approach infinity, right? So if all we're doing is maxing out our utilization, we're setting ourselves up to fail, right? So what we really want to be doing is thinking about outcomes and not outputs, right? What are the goals? What can we be optimizing for in our system and then create the conditions for those successes?
Yeah, I want to highlight what you just said. It's about outcomes, not outputs.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and so what would you say to engineers who may be, wary of metrics being used to measure their team's performance?
They're not wrong. For a long time, measures have been weaponized, right? And so there are a few things that we can think about here. First is, what is the goal of the metric, right? If the metric is specifically individually focused, we can think about how that can be used specifically for the individual's benefit. We did a wonderful study at GitHub called the Good Day Project, and individual level metrics were only shared with developers. And they loved it because they knew it was only for them. The goal was to help them find a way to have better days more reliably. Because I don't know about you, but some days I'm like, I had a wonderful and amazing day. And some days I'm like, today was hard and I don't know why. It was so hard to really get into the groove. So that's really helpful. Another one is to think about, how we can change the goal of metrics to be from things that are easily countable to, how do we, instead of weaponizing them, incentivizing them? How can we use them to abstract at a higher level and help people just make better decisions? And that, frankly, is not a measurement thing. That's a cultural thing.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you touched on the Good Day study because I think it's a great segue into the next question, which is, what do you actually see as the future of engineering measurement, and what should engineering leaders start to be thinking about?
Yeah, so, okay, when I think about future, right now I wear a few hats. One of them is research, and very, very kind of H3 future thinking research in several years, 5 years. And I'm looking at what AI is making possible. And so when I think about that, I think about what types of things could we just remove from people? What things would I never have to do? Like check email. Email's not fun. Manage my calendar. That's not fun. So what types of things could I allow people to do? Not manage the administrivia. Not worry about minuscule things that are not exciting, right? How could we abstract that data into immediate magic insights, right? If we look at what AI is doing right now, it just looks like magic. How could we think of the AI models of the future and go straight to insights, also thinking about minimizing bias and creating the additional data available and just skipping straight to insights for people?
Yeah, and you touched on something. You didn't specifically say it, but you touched on things like AI pair programmers or things that make boilerplate code easier to generate. And some of that, even though it's early in its adoption lifecycle, is probably pretty far out, 5-10 years from mainstream adoption. What should engineering leaders be excited about today?
So this is a wonderful question because what I think is new or relatively new now is that we have so much data and so many insights available to us now that we have the ability to see more of our systems and make better decisions. We don't have to wait for this AI revolution in 5 to 10 years, right? We can now think about what data do we have, what data am I missing, so that we can surface these insights.
Yeah. And so now that we've uncovered with all of you how we can best think about DORA and leverage metrics to drive meaningful impact with our teams, I'd love to actually talk about how you can do that today in our product. And so, Nicole, I'd love to thank you, and I always love our conversations and talking with you.
Absolutely.
And so excited that you were here and able to do this. So thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.